The humid Savannah air clung to my skin like a second layer, heavy with the weight of summer and something far darker. It was late August 2025, and I stood in the living room of our modest Craftsman home, the oak floorboards creaking under my swollen feet. 9 months pregnant, I felt every inch of my body straining under the burden of our unborn child. But it wasn't the physical ache that froze me in place. It was James's voice, sharp and venomous, cutting through the stillness of our Georgia evening. "Sarah, enough!" He bellowed, his hazel eyes flashing with a fury I'd rarely seen. "All you do is threaten me with the baby. Have I spoiled you so much you've forgotten how to reason?" His words landed like a slap, each syllable dripping with disdain. James, my husband of 5 years, stood by the fireplace, his broad shoulders rigid, his doctor's scrub still wrinkled from a long shift at Savannah General. The man who once promised me forever now looked at me like I was a stranger. I opened my mouth to respond, but a sharp pain stabbed through my belly, stealing my breath. I pressed a trembling hand to my stomach, feeling the faint kick of our child, a reminder of the life we'd created together. But as my fingers rested there, something shifted inside me. Not just the baby, but something deeper, something otherworldly. A flood of memories, vivid and jagged, surged through my mind like a storm breaking over the Savannah River. Images of another life where James's betrayal had cost me everything flickered. I saw myself pleading with him, my body broken from childbirth, my heart shattered as he turned away. I saw our newborn son stolen from my arms. I saw a dark, muddy swamp, my lifeless body sinking beneath its surface, James's cold voice cursing me as he walked away. I gasped, clutching the arm of the sofa for support. The pain in my belly wasn't just physical, it was a signal, a cosmic tether pulling me back to a moment I'd lived before. I had been reborn, granted a second chance by some divine force, perhaps a flicker of justice woven into the fabric of the universe. In that other life, I'd been naive, clinging to a marriage that was already dead, begging a man who'd chosen another woman over me and our child. But not this time. This time I knew the truth. This time I'd rewrite the ending. James's voice snapped me back to the present. "Well, Sarah, got anything to say, or are you just going to stand there?" His tone was mocking, now his hands on his hips, as if daring me to challenge him. I straightened, meeting his gaze with a calm I didn't feel. My heart pounded, but my mind was clear, sharpened by the memories of my past life. I wouldn't let him see my fear rage or the burning fire in my chest. I had a story to tell, one of betrayal and redemption, and I'd make sure it reached the world. Speaking of stories, if you're gripped by this tale of heartbreak and second chances, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps others find this journey on our channel. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment that changed everything? And if you want to see how this unfolds, subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss a single twist. This is just the beginning, and trust me, you'll want to stick around for what comes next. But back to that humid Savannah night. I took a slow breath, my hand still resting on my belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. "James." I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I'm not trying to threaten you. I want to understand why you're doing this now." My words were careful, probing, testing the waters. I'd exploded in anger in my past life when he announced his plan to join the war effort as a frontline doctor. I'd been furious that he'd applied in secret, that he'd made such a life-altering decision without so much as a word to me, his pregnant wife. Back then, I'd been blindsided, desperate to keep him home to protect our family. But that desperation had led to disaster. This time I saw the truth behind his eyes. James wasn't driven by patriotism or a noble desire to save lives. He was running toward Abigail, his first love, a nurse he'd never let go of even after we married. In my past life, I'd learned too late that his application to serve in the war zone was a ruse to reunite with her. When I forced him to stay, he'd turned on me, blaming me for her death in a botched rescue mission. That blame had fueled his cruelty, leading to the kidnapping of our son and my murder. But now reborn, I had the chance to outmaneuver him, to let him chase his obsession and watch it destroy him. "I'm doing this because it's my duty," James said, his voice rising with self-righteous conviction. "The war's taken too many lives, Sarah. Soldiers are out there dying for America, and there aren't enough doctors to help them. You think I want to leave you? I'm doing this for our country." His words were polished and rehearsed, but they didn't fool me. I'd heard them before in that other life, and I'd believed them until I died. I tilted my head, studying him. His jaw was set. his eyes avoiding mine, darting to the framed photo of us on the mantel. A wedding picture, me in a simple white dress, him grinning like he meant it. That photo felt like a lie now. Duty, I repeated softly, letting the word hang between us. That's what this is about. My tone was neutral, but I mapped out my next move inside. I wouldn't beg him to stay, not this time. I'd let him go, let him think he'd won, and then I'd make sure everyone, our families, our friends, the whole damn city of Savannah, knew exactly who James really was. The pain in my belly eased, but my resolve hardened. I glanced at the window where the Spanish moss swayed gently in the evening breeze, a reminder of the world outside this suffocating room. This was my breaking point, the moment where everything changed. I wasn't the Sarah who'd begged and pleaded in another life. I was someone who'd seen the end and returned to rewrite it. James thought he was in control, but had no idea what was coming. I'd make sure of it. The next morning, the Savannah sun poured through the kitchen windows, painting the white cabinets gold. I sat at the table, a mug of decaf coffee cooling in my hands, my mind still reeling from the night before. James was upstairs, packing for his deployment, the sound of zippers and drawers slamming echoing through our Craftsman home. Each thud was a reminder of his determination to leave to chase a ghost from his past while I carried our future in my womb. My fingers tightened around the mug, but I kept my face calm, my plan taking shape. James's words from last night still lingered, his so-called duty to serve as a frontline doctor in the war zone. Soldiers are dying for America, he'd said, his voice thick with conviction. As doctors, we have to do our part. In my past life, I'd bought into that speech, believing his heart was with our country, with me, with our unborn son. I'd been furious when I learned he'd applied, secretly hiding his plans until the paperwork was done. I'd argued, begged, even threatened to leave if he didn't wait until after the baby was born. That anger blinded me, keeping me from seeing the truth. James wasn't driven by patriotism. Abigail drove him. Abigail Carter, his first love, was a nurse he'd dated before we met. In my past life, I'd pieced it together too late. James had never stopped loving her even after we married and I got pregnant. His application to serve wasn't about saving lives, it was about reuniting with her in the chaos of the war zone. When I forced him to stay, Abigail died in a rescue mission gone wrong and James blamed me. That blame turned to hatred, festering until he orchestrated the kidnapping of our newborn son and my murder in a Georgia swamp. The memory of his voice, cold and vicious, "You kept me from Abigail and she died because of you," still sent a chill down my spine. But this time I wasn't that naive, Sarah. Reborn, I saw through his lies. The cosmic force that brought me back, whether divine justice or some universal reckoning, had given me clarity. I knew James's heart wasn't with us or our child. It was with Abigail, always had been. And now I'd use that knowledge to unravel him. I wouldn't fight his departure. I'd let him go, let him think he'd won, and then I'd expose him to everyone who mattered. James clumped down the stairs, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His scrubs were gone, replaced by cargo pants and a plain t-shirt, his face set in determination and impatience. "Sarah," he said, dropping the bag by the door, "I'm heading to the hospital to finalize some things. I leave in 3 days." His tone was clipped, as if daring me to argue again. I looked up from my coffee, meeting his gaze with a calm I'd practiced in my mind all morning. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "If you need to do this, I won't stop you." The words felt foreign on my tongue, so different from the desperate pleas of my past life. James blinked his brow, furrowing in surprise. He'd expected a fight, tears, maybe another threat about the baby. But I gave him nothing, just a faint nod and a sip of my coffee. His eyes narrowed, searching my face for a trap. "You mean that," he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "No more guilt trips about the baby, no more wait until after he's born." I set the mug down, folding my hands over my belly. "You said it's your duty, James. I trust you." The lie was smooth, calculated. I didn't trust him, not anymore. But I needed him to believe I did, to lower his guard. In my past life, my resistance had pushed him to cruelty. I'd play along this time, let him walk into his own downfall. James's shoulders relaxed, a smug smile tugging at his lips. "Good. At least you're finally seeing sense." He grabbed his keys from the counter, his movements lighter now, as if my agreement had lifted a weight. "I'll be back tonight. We'll talk more then." He paused at the door, glancing back. "And Sarah, tell your parents I'm going. They deserve to know." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Of course. I'll call them today. You should tell yours too." My suggestion was deliberate, a seed planted. In my past life, I'd hidden James's decision from our families, not wanting to worry them. That secrecy had left me isolated and vulnerable when he turned on me. This time, I'd make sure everyone knew my parents, his parents, our friends. Let James explain his duty to them. Let them see the cracks in his story. He hesitated, his hand on the doorknob. "No need for that," he muttered, his tone sharp again. "I'll handle it." But I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes. He didn't want his parents involved, didn't want them questioning his motives. That was precisely why I'd pushed the idea. "James," I said softly, standing to face him, "war's dangerous. You're their only son. They'd want to say goodbye." My voice was gentle, almost pleading, but inside I was laying a trap. If he told his parents they'd ask questions he couldn't answer without lying. I'd ensure they found out if he didn't, and his secrecy would raise red flags. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Fine, I'll call them later." His tone was dismissive, but I caught the tension in his jaw. He didn't like being cornered, even subtly. Good. I wanted him off balance just enough to make mistakes. As the door clicked shut behind him, I leaned against the counter, my heart racing. The kitchen was quiet now, save for the hum of the fridge and the distant chirp of cicadas outside. I pressed a hand to my belly, feeling another kick from our son. "We're going to be okay," I whispered to him, to myself. "This time I'm in control." I picked up my phone and dialed my mom's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm but tinged with worry. "Sarah, everything all right? You sound off." I said, "Mom, I need to tell you something," keeping my tone even. "James is leaving for the war zone. He's going to be a frontline doctor." I paused, letting the words sink in. "I'm supporting him, but you and Dad should know. Can you come to Savannah?" Her gasp was audible, followed by a flurry of questions. I answered calmly, sticking to the plan. When I hung up, she and Dad had already booked flights from Atlanta. Next, I'd ensure James's parents heard the news, whether he told them or not. Every step I took was a thread in the web I was weaving, one that would catch James in his own lies. I glanced at the wedding photo on the counter taken 5 years ago, under a Savannah oak draped in Spanish moss. James's grin, my hopeful smile, it all felt like a different lifetime. And it was. I'd lived that life, loved that man, and paid the ultimate price. Now reborn, I saw the truth. James's heart had never been mine. It belonged to Abigail, to a past he couldn't let go. But I wasn't the same Sarah anymore. I was stronger, sharper, ready to protect my son and expose the man who'd betrayed us. This was just the beginning, and James had no idea what was coming. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of our Savannah home, casting delicate shadows across the kitchen table, where I sat, my hands wrapped around a glass of orange juice. The house was quiet now, James leaving for the hospital to finalize his deployment papers. The faint hum of cicadas outside mingled with the steady ticking of the wall clock, marking the seconds until my life would change forever. My fingers brushed my swollen belly, feeling the gentle kick of our son Ethan, a reminder of the stakes in this second chance at life. But my mind wasn't here in this sunlit kitchen. It was lost in the memories of another life, one where love had turned to betrayal and trust had led to tragedy. In that past life, I'd been a different Sarah, naive, hopeful, blind to the fault lines in my marriage. James and I had built a life together, or so I thought, in this same Craftsman home on a quiet Savannah street. We'd painted the nursery pale blue, dreaming of our son's future. But that dream cracked when James announced he'd applied to be a frontline doctor in the war zone just weeks before my due date. I'd been furious, not just at the decision, but at the secrecy. He hadn't consulted me, hadn't even hinted at it. I'd argued, pleaded, begged him to wait until after our son was born. "Just a few weeks, James," I'd said, tears streaming down my face. "We need you here." But he'd been immovable, his eyes cold, his voice sharp with a resolve I didn't recognize. Desperate, I'd used the only leverage I had, our unborn child. I told him if he left, he'd be abandoning us, that I'd raise our son alone. It worked, or so I thought. James stayed, but from that day he became a stranger. He traded shifts at Savannah General, avoiding home, leaving me alone in the final days of my pregnancy. The night I went into labor, he wasn't there. I gave birth to Ethan in a haze of pain and fear, the hospital room echoing with my cries and the absence of the man I loved. When I woke, Ethan was gone, stolen from the nursery. I searched for him, frantic, until a shadowy figure hired by James ended my life in a deserted alley near the Savannah River. As my blood pooled on the cold ground, I heard James's voice, chilling and final. "You kept me from Abigail, Sarah. She died because of you. You don't deserve our son." As a drifting soul tethered to James by some cruel cosmic thread, I watched him dump our bodies, mine and Ethan's, into a murky Georgia swamp. The water closed over us, and he stood at the edge, his face twisted with hatred. "You used death to threaten me, Sarah. Then die with our kid. If you hadn't stopped me, Abigail would be alive." His words burned into my soul, fueling a rage that lingered even as I faded into nothingness. Abigail, his first love. A nurse he'd dated before me had been killed in a war zone rescue mission. James blamed me for keeping him from her, for stopping him from saving her. That blame had driven him to destroy our family. I was sure that the memory of that betrayal was why I'd been reborn the night before, when James's words had cut through me. A sharp pain in my belly had triggered a vision, a fleeting image of that swamp, of my lifeless body sinking, and a voice not my own whispering, "Go back. Make it right." It was as if the universe, or some divine force woven into its fabric, had seen the injustice and granted me a second chance. Not just to save myself, but to protect Ethan, expose James, and rewrite the story that ended in darkness. I didn't know why or how I'd been chosen, but the clarity of those memories, the weight of that cosmic whisper, told me this was my purpose. Sitting in the kitchen, I sipped my juice, the tartness grounding me in the present. In my past life, I'd hidden James's decision from our families, not wanting to worry them. My parents, living in Atlanta, had been devastated when James later lied, claiming I'd run off with another man, taking Ethan with me. Their hair turned gray from grief, their lives consumed by a futile search for me. James's parents, especially his mother Linda, had vilified me, believing his lies. This time, I wouldn't let that happen. I'd ensure everyone knew the truth, my parents, his parents, our friends in Savannah. James's duty was a lie, a cover for his obsession with Abigail, and I'd let him walk into that lie, let it consume him, while I protected what mattered most. I stood smoothing my maternity dress and walked to the living room where our wedding photo sat on the mantel. James's grin, my hopeful smile, it mocked me now. I turned it face down, a small act of defiance. The phone call to my parents yesterday had set things in motion. They were on their way, arriving tomorrow to support me. James had reluctantly agreed to tell his parents, but I knew he'd dodge it if he could. That was fine. I'd make sure they heard one way or another. Every step I took was a thread in the web I was weaving, one that would trap James in his own deception. I wasn't the Sarah who'd begged and lost. I was reborn, and this time I'd win. The Savannah afternoon was thick with humidity, making your clothes cling and your thoughts feel heavy. I sat on the porch of our Craftsman home, a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand, watching the Spanish moss sway in the breeze. James had been gone all morning, finalizing his deployment at Savannah General, and the house felt emptier without his restless energy. My phone buzzed on the wicker table beside me, my mom confirming their flight from Atlanta tomorrow. I texted back a quick message to see you soon. My mind is already racing ahead to the plan I'd set. Yesterday, when James had stood in our living room berating me for threatening him with our unborn son, I'd seen the truth in his eyes. His talk of duty, of saving soldiers in the war zone, was a facade. He was chasing Abigail, his first love, the nurse who'd haunted our marriage like a shadow. In my past life, I'd fought his decision to leave, desperate to keep our family together. That fight had cost me everything: Ethan, my life, my trust in the man I'd loved. But reborn with the memories of that betrayal burning in my chest, I chose a different path. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't fight. I'd let James go, let him think he'd won, and let his own choices expose him. The front door creaked open and James stepped onto the porch, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder. His face was flushed from the heat, his hazel eyes scanning me with impatience and suspicion. "Sarah," he said, his voice sharp. "I'm heading out again. Got a meeting with the deployment coordinator." He paused, waiting for a reaction, maybe expecting another argument. I sipped my tea, the ice clinking softly, and looked up at him. "Okay," I said, my tone calm, almost indifferent. "You're doing what you need to do." The words were deliberate, a stark contrast to the tearful pleas of my past life. I could see the surprise flicker across his face, his brow furrowing as if he'd stepped into a trap he couldn't quite see. "You're really okay with this?" he asked, setting the bag down and crossing his arms. "No more guilt trips about the baby, no more stay for us." His tone was laced with mockery, but there was an edge of unease, like he didn't trust my sudden compliance. I set the glass down, folding my hands over my belly. Ethan kicked a small reassurance that kept me grounded. You said it's your duty, James, I replied, my voice steady. You're a doctor. Soldiers need you. I get it. The lie was smooth practiced. I didn't believe a word of his patriotic speech, but I needed him to think I did. I needed him to lower his guard and walk into the war zone without suspecting I was already unraveling his story. James's shoulders relaxed, a smug smile tugging at his lips. Good, he said, nodding. At least you're finally seeing sense. I knew you'd come around. He picked up his bag, turning toward the steps, but I wasn't done yet. James, I called, my voice soft but firm. He stopped, glancing back, his eyes narrowing. You should tell your parents before you go. They'd want to know. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was laying the first thread of my web. I'd kept James's decisions secret in my past life, shielding our families from worry. That secrecy had left me isolated when he betrayed me. This time, I'd make sure everyone knew my parents, his parents, our neighbors in Savannah. Let James explain his duty to them. Let them see the cracks in his story. He frowned, his hand tightening on the bag's strap. No need for that, he muttered, his tone sharp. I'll handle it when I'm ready. But I saw the tension in his jaw, the flicker of unease in his eyes. He didn't want his parents involved, didn't want their questions. That was precisely why I'd pushed. I said, war's dangerous, James, standing to face him, my maternity dress swaying in the breeze. You're their only son. They deserve a chance to say goodbye. My words were gentle, almost pleading, but they were calculated. If he told his parents, they'd ask why he was leaving his pregnant wife. If he didn't, I'd make sure they found out, and his secrecy would raise red flags. Either way, he'd be exposed. James sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Fine, Sarah, he snapped. I'll call them tonight. Happy? His tone was dismissive, but I caught the strain in his voice. He hated being cornered, even subtly. Good. I wanted him off balance and making mistakes. Very, I said, offering a small smile. Safe travels, James. I turned to my tea, letting him think he'd won this round. He muttered something and strode down the steps, his boots crunching on the gravel path. As his car pulled away, I leaned back in the wicker chair, my heart racing, but my resolve unshaken. I pulled out my phone and dialed my best friend Emma, who lived across town. Hey, Em, I said when she answered, keeping my voice light. Can you do me a favor, call Linda and let her know James is deploying to the war zone. He's supposed to tell her, but you know how he is. Emma, always eager for gossip, agreed without hesitation. I hung up, knowing Linda would be on the phone with James by nightfall, demanding answers. Every move I made was a step toward exposing him and protecting Ethan and myself. The porch creaked as I shifted my hand, resting on my belly. Ethan kicked again, stronger this time, as if he knew we were in this together. Don't worry, little man, I whispered. Mommy's got this. In my past life, I'd been a victim of James's lies. But reborn, I was a strategist weaving a plan to let his obsession with Abigail destroy him. The war zone was waiting, and so was I. The sterile hum of Savannah General Hospital buzzed in my ears as I sat in the waiting room, my hands folded over my swollen belly. It was the next day, August 2025, and the Savannah heat pressed against the windows, making the air-conditioned room feel like a refuge. I'd come for a routine pregnancy checkup, but my mind was far from routine. The memories of my past life, James's betrayal, Ethan's kidnapping, my murder in a dark alley, clung to me like the humidity outside. Reborn by some cosmic force, a whisper of justice that had pulled me back to this moment, I was no longer the naive Sarah who'd begged James to stay. I was here to protect my son and expose the man who'd destroyed us. But today, fate had other plans. I'd barely settled into the hard plastic chair when I heard James's voice, low and urgent, from a nearby hallway. I have to see her, Mike said, his tone laced with a desperation I hadn't heard in this life. Curious, I eased out of my seat, wincing, as Ethan shifted inside me and moved toward the sound, keeping out of sight behind a corner. James stood with a colleague, his back to me, his hands gesturing wildly. Abigail's deploying to the war zone. Her letter said it might be her last. I can't let her go without seeing her one more time. Mike, a fellow doctor with graying hair, frowned. James, is she worth the risk? You've got a wife and a kid on the way. That war zone's a death trap. My heart thudded, not from shock but from confirmation. Abigail Carter, James's first love, was the reason he was so eager to leave. In my past life, I'd learned too late that his duty as a frontline doctor was a lie to reunite with her. Hearing it straight from his mouth, I felt a cold clarity settle over me. James's voice dropped, almost a whisper. My mom broke us up years ago and said Abigail wasn't good enough. I married Sarah, but. He trailed off, and I caught the glint of something in his hand, a folded piece of paper. Abigail's letter found me after all this time. She's saving lives, and I must be there with her. His words were a knife, not for the pain they caused, but for the truth they laid bare. Our marriage, our son, our life in Savannah was all a compromise to him, a shadow of the love he'd never let go. I pressed myself against the wall, my breath shallow. Abigail wasn't just a memory, but a force, a nurse whose letter had rekindled James's obsession. In my past life, I'd never seen her, only heard her name as James cursed me for her death. Now I pictured her, a woman with sharp eyes and a calculated smile, pulling James toward danger with words carefully chosen to stir his heart. Her letter wasn't just a farewell, it was a hook, and James had bitten. Mike sighed, shaking his head. What about Sarah? She's due any day. You're really going to leave her like this? James didn't answer, his silence louder than any words. I knew that silence from my past life was the sound of his indifference, his choice to prioritize Abigail over us. My fingers tightened into fists, but I stayed still, waiting. As they turned to walk away, something fluttered to the floor. James didn't notice, but I did. I waited until they were out of sight, then waddled over my belly, slowing my steps. It was the letter, creased and worn, as if James had read it 100 times. I unfolded it, my eyes scanning Abigail's neat handwriting. Dear James, it has begun. I'm deploying to the front lines. It's dangerous, and this may be my last letter. I wish you a good life, but we'll meet again if fate allows. The words were polite, almost distant, but there was a subtle pull, a hint of longing that I knew James couldn't resist. She didn't beg him to come, but didn't need to. She knew he would. I slipped the letter into my purse, my mind racing. This was evidence, a weapon I could use to expose James's true motives. I'd been blindsided in my past life, learning of Abigail only after it was too late. Now I had her words, proof of the lie behind his duty. I returned to the waiting room, my checkup forgotten for the moment. The nurse called my name, but I barely heard her, my thoughts consumed by the plan taking shape. I'd let James go to the war zone, let him chase Abigail, but I'd make sure our families knew why. The letter was my ace, and I'd play it when the time was right. Back home, I sat on the couch, the letter on the coffee table. The Savannah evening was quiet, the Spanish moss outside swaying like a curtain hiding secrets. Ethan kicked, grounding me. We're going to be okay, I whispered to him, my hand on my belly. James thought he was in control, but he was wrong. Abigail's shadow loomed over our marriage, but I'd use it to tear his facade apart. The hospital visit had given me more than a clean bill of health, it had given me power. The next morning, the Savannah air was thick with the promise of rain, gray clouds gathering over our Craftsman home. I stood in the kitchen, slicing peaches for breakfast, the knife steady in my hand, despite the turmoil in my heart. My parents were due to arrive from Atlanta in a few hours, and James's mother, Linda, had called last night, her voice shrill with panic after my friend Emma tipped her off about James's deployment. My plan was working. Both families were converging, and James's lies would soon face scrutiny. Reborn with the memories of my past life's tragedy, James's betrayal, Ethan's kidnapping, my murder, I was no longer the Sarah who'd hidden the truth to protect him. Today, I'd let the storm break. James was at the hospital again, dodging his parents' calls, but I knew Linda wouldn't let him off easily. She was a force, all sharp edges and overbearing love, always quick to judge me in my past life. When James had lied, claiming I'd run off with Ethan, she'd called me useless, her words a curse that echoed through my grief. This time I'd turn her judgment back on her son. I set the peaches aside and checked my phone. My mom had texted, confirming their early flight. "We're here for you, Sarah," she wrote. I smiled, the warmth of their support, a stark contrast to the coldness I'd faced alone before. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door to find Linda and her husband Robert standing on the porch. Linda's face was a mask of fury, her gray hair pulled tight in a bun, her eyes boring into me. Robert, quieter but no less tense, stood behind her, his hands in his pockets. Sarah, Linda snapped, pushing past me into the living room. "Where's James? Don't tell me he's already gone." I closed the door, keeping my expression calm. "He's at the hospital, Linda. He's leaving tomorrow." My voice was steady, but inside I braced for the storm. In my past life, I'd avoided these confrontations, swallowing my pain to keep the peace. Now I welcomed them. Linda spun to face me, her hands on her hips. "You're his wife, Sarah. How could you let him go to a war zone? You're about to have his child absolutely useless. The word stung just as before, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard it too often in that other life when she blamed me for James's lies. Now I saw her for what she was, a mother blind to her son's flaws, desperate to control a situation she didn't understand. Before I could respond, my parents' car pulled into the driveway. My mom Ellen stepped out, her face etched with worry, followed by my dad Tom carrying their overnight bags. They hurried up the steps, and I opened the door, grateful for their presence. "Sarah," my mom said, pulling me into a hug. "Are you okay?" Her eyes flicked to Linda, sensing the tension. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, squeezing her hand and dealing with some things. I turned to Linda, who was pacing, now her anger barely contained. "Linda, I didn't let James go. He made his choice. He says it's his duty as a doctor." "Duty?" Linda scoffed, her voice rising. "He's abandoning you and his baby. You should have stopped him, Sarah. What kind of wife are you?" Her words were sharp, but didn't cut like they used to. I was ready for this. My dad stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Linda Sarah's 9 months pregnant and stressed enough to need a hospital checkup. What more do you expect her to do? James is the one walking away." His words silenced her momentarily, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. My mom chimed in, her tone softer but no less pointed. "His legs are his own, Linda. Sarah can't chain him to the house if he's set on going." She put a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. In my past life, I'd kept them in the dark, and their grief when I died had broken them. This time they were here, and I'd tell them everything soon. Linda's face reddened, but she had no comeback. She turned to Robert, who'd been silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Say something, Robert. Our son's walking into danger, and she's just standing there." Robert sighed, his shoulders slumping, but he didn't speak. I saw the resignation in his eyes, a hint that he suspected James wasn't telling the whole truth. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Linda, I tried talking to James. He's made up his mind. He's leaving tomorrow, and he wanted you to know. I'm supporting his decision because I have to focus on our baby." My voice was steady, but I let a tremor creep in just enough to make her pause. I wasn't lying. James had agreed to tell them, though I doubted he would. Emma's call had forced his hand, and now Linda's anger was aimed at me, just as I'd planned. Let her rage. It would only make James's lies more obvious when they unraveled. Linda's eyes narrowed, but she didn't press further. "We're going to the hospital," she said, grabbing Robert's arm. "We'll talk to James ourselves." They stormed out, leaving a tense silence in their wake. My mom hugged me again, her arms warm and steady. "We're staying until this is sorted," she said. "You don't have to go through this alone." I nodded, my throat tight. "Thanks, Mom." "Dad." I led them to the kitchen where the peaches sat untouched. I felt Ethan kick as we sat down, reminding me why I was doing this. In my past life, I'd been alone when James turned on me. I had my parents' plan and Abigail's letter tucked safely in my purse this time. James thought he was chasing his first love, but he was walking into a trap of his own making. The confrontation with Linda was just the beginning. Soon everyone would see James for who he really was. The fluorescent lights of Savannah General Hospital buzzed overhead, casting a cold glow over the hospital room where I lay, my hands resting on my swollen belly. It was late August 2025, and the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the weight of unspoken truths. My parents, Ellen and Tom, sat by my side, their faces etched with worry, after yesterday's tense confrontation with James's mother, Linda. I'd checked into the hospital for a precautionary exam, after feeling sharp pains, a reminder of the stress James's betrayal had caused. But I wasn't here just for my health. I was here to set a trap, one that would unravel James's lies and free me from the marriage that had cost me everything in my past life. In that other life, reborn through a cosmic whisper of justice, I'd begged James to stay, to wait until our son Ethan was born, before deploying as a frontline doctor. My pleas had backfired, turning him into a stranger who orchestrated Ethan's kidnapping, and my murder, blaming me for the death of his first love, Abigail. Now, armed with Abigail's letter proof of his obsession, I was ready to confront him, not with tears, but with a choice that would change everything. The door swung open, and James stormed in, his face flushed with anger, his hospital scrubs wrinkled from a sleepless night. My parents tensed, but I signaled them to stay quiet. Sarah James snapped, ignoring my mom's protective glare. "You called our parents to guilt me. Will, that stopped me from going." His voice was a low growl, his hazel eyes burning with the same self-righteous fury I'd seen in my past life. But this time I wasn't afraid. I sat up, my movements slow and deliberate, and pulled Abigail's letter from my purse. "No guilt trips, James," I said, my voice steady despite my heart racing. "But I know the truth." I tossed the letter onto the bed, watching his eyes widen as he recognized the creased paper. "All your talk of duty and saving soldiers is a lie. You're going to the war zone for Abigail." His face twisted, a mix of shock and fury. "You went through my stuff," he shouted, stepping closer, his hands clenched. My dad stood, a silent warning, but I shook my head, keeping my eyes locked on James. "I found it, James. You're not serving your country. You're chasing a woman who doesn't even want you back." My words were sharp, each one a blade aimed at his pride. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his jaw tight. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Hesitation, maybe even shame. In my past life, he'd been merciless, but now faced with the truth, he faltered. "Sarah," he said, his voice softer, "you don't understand. Abigail's in danger. I cut him off, my tone. Icy divorce or the war. Pick one." The room fell silent, the weight of my ultimatum hanging between us. My mom's hand tightened on mine, but she stayed quiet, trusting me. James stared at me, his expression a storm of emotions, anger, disbelief, and something deeper, something I couldn't name. I pressed harder, knowing his pride would never let him back down. "If you care about this marriage, about our son, stay. I'll pretend none of this happened, but if you go, we're done." His hesitation lingered longer than I expected. For a fleeting second, I wondered if he'd choose us, if some of him still loved me. But then his face hardened, his pride winning out. "No one controls me, Sarah," he spat. "You want a divorce? Fine, let's do it." His voice was loud, almost a roar, but I saw the crack in his armor, the doubt he couldn't hide. He was choosing Abigail just as before, but I was ready this time. We left the hospital together, my parents trailing behind, their silence heavy with support. At the Savannah Civil Affairs Bureau, the clerk glanced at my pregnant belly, her eyes softening with pity. "Are you sure?" she asked, her pen hovering over the divorce papers. "A child's involved. You could wait and talk it out." I shook my head, my resolve unshaken. James signed, first his hand steady, but his eyes avoiding mine. I signed next, securing the house and half our savings, and my signature was a declaration of freedom. As we walked out, James paused, his voice low. "Sarah, I'm doing this for her, but I don't want to lose you. Not completely." His words were a weak attempt at control, a hint of the man who'd once charmed me into believing he cared. But I knew better now. "You made your choice," I said, turning away, my heart light despite the pain. The divorce was final, and James was walking into his own downfall, blind to the trap I'd set with Abigail's letter and our family's scrutiny. Back at the hospital, I settled into my room with my parents. Ethan kicked a reminder of why I'd done this. In my past life, I'd lost him to James's cruelty. I'd protected him and myself with a single calculated move. James thought he was free to chase Abigail, but he'd soon learn the cost of his betrayal. The Savannah sky outside was gray, promising rain, but I felt a spark of hope inside. This was my victory, and it was only the beginning. The Savannah morning was heavy with the threat of rain, the air thick as I stood on the porch of our Craftsman home, watching James load his duffel bag into his car. It was the day of his departure, August 2025, and the divorce papers signed yesterday sat safely in my hospital bag, a tangible symbol of my freedom. My parents were inside making coffee, their presence a steady anchor after the chaos of the past few days. In my past life, reborn through that cosmic whisper of justice, I'd been alone when James left, my pleas ignored, my trust shattered. Now I'd outmaneuvered him, letting him go while ensuring our families knew the truth about his obsession with Abigail. James slammed the car door and turned to me, his hazel eyes searching for something, regret maybe, or weakness. "Sarah," he said, his voice softer than I expected, "I know I've wronged you. I'm going to the war zone, but when I'm back, we'll talk. I'll make this right." His words were laced with a tenderness I hadn't heard in years, but they didn't fool me. He thought I was irrational, that my demand for a divorce was a tantrum he could soothe later. He believed he'd return a hero, that I'd welcome him back with open arms. I leaned against the porch railing, my hand on my belly, feeling Ethan's gentle kick. I said, "Take care of yourself, James," my tone neutral, giving him nothing. Inside, I laughed at his delusion. The divorce was absolute, the black and white text on those papers final. He could chase Abigail to the ends of the earth, but he'd never have me or Ethan again. His confidence, born of arrogance, closed his eyes to the reality I'd crafted. He stepped closer, his expression shifting to something almost pleading. Sarah, I mean it. I'll be back in a month when the baby's born. We'll figure this out. His hand reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back, my eyes cold. I'd clung to moments like this in my past life, hoping they meant he cared. Now I saw them for what they were, manipulations a way to keep me tethered while he pursued his genuine desire. You made your choice, James, I said, my voice firm. Do your duty. The word duty was sharp, a reminder of the lie he'd told our families, which I'd exposed with Abigail's letter. He flinched just slightly, but didn't argue. He nodded, picked up his bag, and walked to the car. As he drove away, the Savannah street felt quieter, the Spanish moss swaying like a silent witness to his departure. I turned back inside where my mom handed me a mug of coffee, her eyes full of unspoken questions. He's gone, I said, sitting at the kitchen table. My dad joined us, his face stern but supportive. You did the right thing, Sarah, he said. He's not worth your tears. I nodded, grateful for their presence. In my past life, I'd hidden James's decision, isolating myself. With my parents here and Linda reeling from the truth, I was far from alone. By evening, Linda called, her voice shrill through the phone. Sarah, how could you let him go? He's your husband. I held the phone away, letting her rant. She'd stormed the hospital yesterday, demanding answers, only to learn James was already on a train north, headed to the war zone. I tried, Linda, I said, my tone measured. He chose to leave for Abigail. The name silenced her, just as I'd hoped. I'd planted the seed with Emma's call, and now it was growing, spreading through our families like wildfire. You knew about her, Linda asked, her voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me? I could hear the accusation, the same useless curse from my past life, but it didn't sting anymore. I said I found out too late, letting a hint of sorrow creep in. Ask James when he's back. He'll tell you everything. I hung up, knowing he wouldn't. His lies would unravel without my help. Over the next few hours, I packed a small bag for the hospital, preparing for Ethan's arrival. The divorce had freed me, but the letter in my purse, Abigail's words, proof of James's betrayal, was my insurance. If he returned and tried to claim Ethan or me, I'd use it to show the world who he really was. My parents stayed close, helping me fold tiny onesies, their quiet support a balm to the wounds of my past life. In that other life, I'd given birth alone, my son stolen, my body broken. I was surrounded by love, ready to welcome Ethan into a world I'd fought for. The Savannah night settled over the house, the crickets a soft chorus outside. I stood by the nursery window looking at the pale blue walls we'd painted together, a dream now tainted by James's lies. But it wasn't over. He thought he could mend what he'd broken, but he was wrong. The war zone awaited him, and so did Abigail's shadow. I'd let him chase her and think he'd won, but the truth was mine, and it would destroy him. I pressed a hand to my belly, smiling softly. We're free, Ethan, I whispered, and we're just getting started. The Savannah sun filtered through the blinds of my new apartment, a cozy one-bedroom just off Forsyth Park, its golden light dancing across the hardwood floors. It was early September 2025, 2 weeks after James departed for the war zone, and the air held the first hint of autumn, a promise of change. I sat on the couch, cradling my newborn son, Ethan, his tiny fingers curled around mine. His eyes, a soft hazel like his father's, sparkled with life, a stark contrast to the frail infant I'd lost in my past life. Reborn, through that cosmic whisper of justice, I'd fought to protect him, securing a divorce and a future free from James's betrayal. With Ethan in my arms and my mother Ellen bustling in the kitchen, I felt the weight of my past life lifting. The apartment was small, but ours funded by the divorce settlement that gave me the house and half our savings. I'd sold the Craftsman home where James's lies had festered, trading it for this fresh start. The walls were still bare, but I'd hung a single photo above the couch, me and Ethan in the hospital, his tiny face nestled against my chest, my smile weary but genuine. My mother had taken it the day he was born, a healthy 7 pounds, unlike the fragile boy I'd birthed in my past life, weakened by stress and abandonment. This time, with my parents' support and a hospital team that monitored me closely, Ethan thrived, his cheeks round and his cries strong. Sarah, want some tea? My mom called, her voice warm as she poured water into a kettle. She'd stayed in Savannah since arriving from Atlanta, her presence a steady anchor through Ethan's birth and my recovery. My dad, Tom, had returned to his job but called daily, his gruff voice softening when he asked about Ethan. In my past life, I'd hidden James's betrayal from them, leaving them devastated when he lied about my disappearance. They knew the truth. James's obsession with Abigail, his first love, had driven him to abandon us. Their unwavering and fierce support was a lifeline I hadn't had before. I shifted Ethan to my shoulder, patting his back gently. "Sure, Mom," I said, my voice light despite the ache in my chest. The divorce had freed me, but the scars of my past life, James's cold voice, the swamp where he'd dumped our bodies, lingered. I started therapy last week, meeting with a kind woman named Dr. Ellis, who helped me unpack the trauma. "You're not just surviving," she'd said in our first session. "You're rebuilding." And I was. I'd enrolled in online business courses, dreaming of opening a Savannah bookstore where Ethan and I could build a new life. The settlement money gave me breathing room, but I wanted to create something of my own, a legacy for my son. My mom set a steaming mug of chamomile tea on the coffee table beside me. "He's perfect," she said, brushing a finger across Ethan's cheek. "You're doing so well, Sarah." Her eyes, lined with worry from the past week, softened with pride. I smiled, grateful for her. In my past life, I'd faced childbirth alone, my body breaking under the strain. Now, with her care meals, late-night feedings, quiet conversations, I was healing physically and emotionally. The doorbell rang, and I tensed my mind, flashing to Linda, James's mother, who'd raged at me for letting him go. But it was Emma, my best friend, her arms full of groceries. She figured you could use some snacks, grinning as she set bags on the counter. Emma had been my secret weapon, tipping off Linda about James's deployment, ensuring his lies couldn't stay hidden. She cooed over Ethan, her laughter filling the apartment with warmth. "This kid's gonna break hearts," she said, winking. We spent the afternoon unpacking groceries and folding tiny onesies, the mundane tasks grounding me in this new reality. I told Emma about my bookstore idea, and she lit up, suggesting we scout locations once I was stronger. "Savannah needs a cozy bookshop," she said. "You and Ethan could make it a home." Her words sparked hope, a vision of storytime sessions with Ethan on my lap, surrounded by shelves of books and the scent of coffee. As evening fell, the Savannah sky turned a soft pink, the park's oak trees casting long shadows through the window. I rocked Ethan to sleep, humming a lullaby my mom used to sing. In my past life, I'd lost him to James's cruelty, my body sinking into a swamp as he cursed me for Abigail's death. Now, holding my son, I felt a fierce determination. I'd given James what he wanted, freedom to chase his first love, but I'd taken back my life. The letter in my purse, Abigail's words that had lured him away, was still my ace, a reminder that I held the truth. Ethan's soft breaths against my neck were my anchor, proof that this time I'd won. The Savannah air was crisp, a rare, cool morning in early September 2025, as I pushed Ethan's stroller through Forsyth Park. His tiny hands clutched a rattle, his giggles blending with the rustle of leaves under the Spanish moss-draped oaks. 3 weeks had passed since James's departure, and my new apartment felt like a sanctuary where Ethan and I could build a future free from his betrayal. My therapy sessions with Dr. Ellis were helping me process the memories of my past life. James's lies, Ethan's kidnapping, and my murder in a dark alley. Reborn through that cosmic force, I'd secured a divorce and exposed James's obsession with Abigail to our families. But that morning's news, delivered by a hushed phone call from Emma, shattered my calm. James was back in Savannah, admitted to Savannah General after a war-zone injury. He'd lost both legs saving Abigail during a skirmish, and the hospital was buzzing with gossip. "They're saying he threw away a perfect life," Emma had whispered. "A wife, a new son, and he ran off for his old flame. Now he's a wreck." I stopped the stroller, my hands tightening on the handles. In my past life, James's hatred had destroyed me. His choices had brought him low, and I felt grim satisfaction. I returned to the apartment where my mom was waiting, her face pale as she relayed more details. "It's all over the hospital," she said, setting a plate of sandwiches on the table. "People are calling it karma. He had everything, you, Ethan, a good job, and chose Abigail." She hesitated and added that Linda's been calling, demanding you visit him, says you're still his wife. Her voice held a mix of anger and pity. I shook my head, rocking Ethan in his bassinet. "We're divorced, Mom. He made his choice." The words were firm, but my mind churned. Linda's calls were no surprise. She'd blamed me for James's departure, her accusations echoing the useless curse of my past life. But I wasn't that Sarah anymore. I had Ethan, my parents, and a plan to keep James out of our lives. That afternoon, Linda showed up at the apartment, her face drawn with fury and grief. "Sarah," she snapped, standing in the doorway. "James is back, crippled, and you haven't even seen him. What kind of woman are you?" My mom stepped forward, but I raised a hand, keeping my voice calm. "Linda, I'm not his wife anymore, I said, meeting her eyes. He divorced me to chase Abigail. Ask him why. Her mouth opened, then closed, her anger faltering. I saw the doubt in her eyes, the same doubt I'd planted when I'd pushed James to tell her about his deployment. He's at the hospital, I continued. See him. See who he's with. Linda's face reddened, but she didn't argue. She turned and left her husband Robert trailing silently behind. My mom hugged me, her voice soft. You're stronger than she'll ever know. I nodded, but my thoughts were on James. I didn't plan to visit, but curiosity gnawed at me. What had happened out there? And who was Abigail really? The next day, Emma called with more gossip. Sarah, it's wild, she said. James is a mess, but Abigail's with him constantly. Nurses say she's cold, though, like she's hiding something. And get this, people are whispering he can't... You know I haven't had kids anymore. I froze, the rumor hitting harder than I expected. In my past life, James's pride had fueled his cruelty. Now crippled and humiliated, he was a shadow of the man who'd betrayed me. I took Ethan to the park again, needing the open air to clear my head. As I pushed the stroller, I remembered Abigail's letter, its subtle pull on James's heart. I realized she wasn't just a nurse, her coldness and presence at his side hinted at something darker. I'd never met her. In my past life, I had only heard her name when James cursed me. Now I sensed a calculated edge, a woman who'd lured him to the war zone for reasons beyond love. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was more than she seemed, a shadow waiting to be exposed. Back home, I tucked Ethan into his crib, his soft snores filling the quiet. My mom was out, giving me a moment to think. The hospital gossip, Linda's demands, Abigail's presence, it all pointed to James's downfall, but I wasn't done. I still held Abigail's letter, proof of his betrayal, and I'd use it if he tried to come near Ethan. In my past life, I'd lost everything to his lies. Now reborn, I watched his world crumble and felt no pity. The Savannah sky darkened, rain clouds gathering, but I was at peace. Ethan was safe, and James was paying the price for his choices. The Savannah air carried a crisp edge the September 2025 morning, bright with the promise of a new season. I sat in my apartment near Forsyth Park, rocking Ethan in his crib, his soft coos a soothing contrast to the storm brewing in my mind. 3 weeks had passed since James's return from the war zone, his legs lost in a skirmish to save Abigail, his first love. The hospital gossip had painted him a fool, a man who'd abandoned his wife and newborn son for a fleeting romance, now crippled and humiliated. My therapy sessions with Dr. Ellis had helped me process the memories of my past life. James's betrayal, Ethan's kidnapping, my murder in a Savannah alley. But the news that arrived that morning shook me to my core. My mother, Ellen, burst into the apartment, her face pale as she clutched her phone. Sarah, you won't believe this, she said, trembling. The police were at the hospital. Abigail's an enemy agent. James was treating hostile soldiers out there, and they're both facing execution. My heart skipped, not from fear, but from a strange relief. In my past life, reborn through that cosmic whisper of justice, I died because James was obsessed with Abigail. Now her true nature, a calculated operative who'd lured him to the war zone, was exposed, sealing his fate. I set Ethan's rattle down, my mind racing. Abigail's letter found in the hospital had been subtle, manipulative, pulling James with promises of a reunion. Her cold presence at his bedside, whispered about by nurses, had hinted at something darker. Now it made sense. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a traitor using James's love to further her mission. I'd suspected as much, but the truth was sharper, more final. How did they find out? I asked, my voice steady despite the weight of the revelation. My mom sat beside me, her hands twisting in her lap. A sting operation, she said. They intercepted communications. Abigail was feeding intel to the enemy, and James, unthinkingly following her, patched up their wounded. He didn't even know. Her eyes met mine, filled with pity, not for James, but for the life I'd almost lost again. In my past life, his hatred had destroyed me. Now his blind devotion had damaged him. The doorbell rang, and I tensed, expecting Linda, James's mother, who'd been relentless since his return, blaming me for his downfall. But it was a police officer, his badge glinting in the morning light. Mrs. Carter, he asked, using my married name, though the divorce had stripped it away. We need you to come to the station. James has information about the enemy, but he'll only talk if he sees you. My stomach churned. I'd vowed to keep James out of my life, but this was bigger than me, a chance to serve the country he'd betrayed. I glanced at Ethan, sleeping peacefully, and nodded. I'll come, I said, my voice firm. My mom offered to watch him, her eyes fierce with support. As I followed the officer to the car, I clutched Abigail's letter in my purse, a reminder of the truth I held. At the station, James sat in a stark room, his wheelchair a harsh contrast to the confident man who'd left me. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot, but they lit up with a desperate intensity when he saw me. "Sarah," he rasped, leaning forward, "you were reborn too, weren't you? You came back to ruin me." His words hit like a shockwave. In my past life, he'd cursed me as I died, blaming me for Abigail's death. Now he believed I'd orchestrated his downfall, that the same cosmic force had brought us both back. I kept my face neutral, aware of the officer recording nearby. "James, what are you talking about?" I said, my tone laced with feigned confusion. "Reborn revenge. I just wanted to protect our son." My words were careful, calculated. I wasn't about to admit my rebirth, not with a police officer listening, not when James's madness could work in my favor. His hands gripped his wheelchair, his voice rising. "You knew about Abigail. You pushed me to go to divorce you. You wanted this." His eyes were wild, but I saw the truth. He remembered our past life, the swamp, his betrayal. Yet he was too late. His choices had led him here, not mine. I leaned back, letting his accusations hang in the air. "Officer," I said, turning to the man at the table, "is he okay? He's not making sense." My voice trembled just enough to sell the act. The officer frowned, scribbling a note, and escorted me out. James's shouts echoed behind me. "You did this, Sarah," but I didn't look back. His execution was set, and Abigail's with it. The police cleared our family of any involvement, but Linda and Robert were shattered, their son's treason a stain they couldn't wash away. Back at the apartment, I held Ethan, his warmth grounding me. James's fate was sealed, and Abigail's betrayal had been the final nail. In my past life, I'd died for their love. Now reborn, I'd watched them fall, and I felt nothing but relief. The Savannah sky outside was clear, a new day dawning, and I was ready to move forward free at last. The Savannah morning was soft, the September 2025 sunlight filtering through the oak trees outside my father's rural Georgia home, an hour from the city. I sat on the porch, cradling Ethan, his tiny hands grasping at the air as he babbled. It had been a week since James's execution, the news of his and Abigail's treason spreading through Savannah like wildfire. The crowd gathered to watch had cheered, but I'd stayed away, choosing this quiet moment with my son over the spectacle. Reborn through that cosmic whisper of justice, I'd outmaneuvered James, protected Ethan, and built a new life from the ashes of my past one. With the past finally buried, I was ready to embrace the future. We'd moved to my dad's home days after the police visit, fleeing Linda's relentless harassment. She'd tried everything, banging on my apartment door, begging me to reconcile with James, even attempting to sneak in and take Ethan, believing he'd fix her son. I'd had enough. Under the cover of night, my mom and I packed our things, sold the apartment lease, and drove to this quiet farmhouse, its fields starkly contrasting to Savannah's bustle. My dad, Tom, welcomed us with open arms, his gruff voice softening as he held Ethan. He said, "You're safe here," Sarah and I believed him. My therapy with Dr. Ellis, now over video calls, had become a lifeline. "You've reclaimed your story," she'd said last session, her voice warm. "You're not just a survivor, you're a creator." I was. I'd enrolled in online business courses, and my dream of opening a Savannah bookstore was taking shape. I pictured a cozy shop near Forsyth Park with storytime sessions for Ethan and other kids' shelves filled with novels and the scent of coffee. The divorce settlement gave me a financial cushion, but this was about legacy, a gift for my son and me. My mom joined me on the porch, a mug of coffee in her hand. "He's growing so fast," she said, smiling at Ethan. She'd stayed to help, her presence a steady comfort. In my past life, I'd hidden James's betrayal, leaving my parents devastated when he lied about my disappearance. Now they knew everything, his obsession with Abigail, his role in my past death, though I'd never spoken of my rebirth. Their fierce and unwavering support had carried me through Ethan's birth and James's downfall. The mail arrived, and my dad handed me a letter, his brow furrowed. It was from Linda, her handwriting shaky. "Sarah," it read, "I was wrong. I enabled James, pushed him toward Abigail years ago, and blamed you when he fell. I'm sorry." I stared at the words, a mix of anger and pity stirring. In my past life, Linda's accusations had haunted me, her useless curse echoing through my grief. Now broken by James's treason and Robert's withdrawal into silence, she sought forgiveness. I set the letter aside, unsure if I'd respond. Her apology was closure, but Ethan and I didn't need her. I recalled James's final words at the station, his desperate claim that I'd been reborn to ruin him. He'd remembered our past life, but it was too late to change his fate. His execution and Abigail's had ended their story, a nurse turned enemy agent using his love to serve her cause. The police had cleared us, but the scandal had destroyed James's parents. Robert's hair had turned white overnight, my mom had heard, and Linda's health was failing. Their pain was their own. I had no room for it. I stood lifting Ethan to my shoulder, his warmth a reminder of why I'd fought. The farmhouse porch overlooked rolling fields, the air sweet with honeysuckle. I'd started sketching plans for the bookstore, imagining a sign that read Ethan's Haven. My parents, now at peace, knowing James's lies were exposed, talked of visiting often, maybe even moving closer. Dr. Ellis's words echoed creator, not just survivor. I was building a life not just for me, but for Ethan, free from the shadows of my past. As the sun rose, I kissed Ethan's forehead, his giggles filling the quiet. "It's over, sweet boy," I whispered. "The man who hurt us is gone. You'll grow up in peace now." The Savannah sky stretched wide, a canvas of possibility, and for the first time in 2 lives I felt truly free. Ethan's smile was my future, and I was ready to live it.